Hello and welcome to Money, 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 your weekly personal finance date with me, Sumaira Abdi. Today we are discussing a very important topic, how to ensure we don't run out of savings post-retirement. And I'll tell you why. In December, a leading private insurer did a survey of over 1,800 respondents spread across 21 cities, and this showed that over 50% of Indians believe that their retirement kitty will be exhausted within just 10 years of retirement as well. 9 out of 10 Indians were concerned that their savings might not last throughout their retired life. And this is something we've been hearing about more frequently from a lot of insurance companies and advisors. So how much can you or should you withdraw to ensure that your savings last you? That's the main question that I'm asking my guests today. So let me invite our two experts, Firoz Aziz, Deputy CEO of Anand Rathi Wealth, and Mohit Gang, CEO and co-founder of Moneyfront.in. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining in. Mohit, my first question to you is that, there's this very famous rule called the 4% rule, right? That you can keep withdrawing at the rate of 4% and it will last you through your retirement. What is this rule and can it ensure that people don't run out of savings?
Okay, I think Sumaira, good afternoon, and a very relevant question which you have raised today, that what is a sustainable rate of withdrawal or what is a sustainable kitty which people can rely on post-retirement. Look, there are many variables which are unknown once you retire, right? And this rule, which is called the Trinity rule, was actually first covered in 1994 in a paper which was introduced by a financial advisor called William Benjamin. What he mentioned was that if you have assets which gives you around 4% return, and that 4% return every year is good enough for you to sustain your yearly expenses, then that asset cover is sufficient for you. So in effect, what he's saying is that that withdrawable rate, which means your yearly withdrawals from your accumulated corpus, should be at the rate of 4%, number one. And this accumulated corpus should last you forever, which is the most critical part in any kind of a corpus, that it has to last. The tap has to continue to run and it can't just stop giving you water at any point in time. So that's the most critical part. And that's where this rule comes in. It's more a thumb of a rule kind of a thing. There are more scientific ways around it, but this is more widely accepted kind of a norm.
Okay, Firoz, this 4% rule, like Mohit said also, that it's quite widely accepted. A lot of people rely on it. But, this rule was based on an asset allocation of 60% to equities, 40% to debt. Is it relevant for those who have a different allocation? And, even in a larger question, is it relevant today when inflation itself is at 6% plus?
Yes, Subira, I think any thumb rule needs a certain degree of customization. Okay, 4%, it's in the context of the Trinity University actually publishing a paper. That's somewhere in the US. Their assumptions of inflation are 3%. And that's why they wanted 3% total return assumed is 7 in the rule. 4% is withdrawn, 3% is inflation, so that your post-inflation corpus is protected. That's the key Trinity rule. To achieve this, they've assumed an asset or allocation of 60-40. So it needs to be corrected for an Indian context, point one. It needs to be corrected for time. Anything produced in 1994-98 may not stand the test of 30 years. So one thing which I love about this rule is the 60% allocation to equity. The second thing which I love about the rule is a 30%, 30 years of post-retirement life. Both are hard-hitting. And both these are not correctly computed in the Indian mindset. People think they're not going to live this for 30 years, live with it for 30 years, and they think equity is out of the window once I retire. So these are the two key takeaways. If I look at this and look at it more positively, saying that there is two key messages for everybody who's retiring or expected to retire. To customize it to an Indian context, we have a rule. We don't have a name to that rule, but trying to compute how many times of your annual current expense do you have as retirement. For example, if you have 1 crore corpus as your retirement corpus, hypothetically, and 10 lakhs is your annual expense, then you have 10 times more the money, right? If you have 2 crores, that means you have 20 times more the money. For each of the slabs, we have a certain recommendation on asset allocation and withdrawal.
Okay, so that's a good rule for us to sort of, start imbibing in our financial plans. But Mohit, earlier you said that, there are a lot of variables which can sort of impact your retirement, right? So exactly what are these variables which have the potential to sort of upset the apple cart? And, how can a solution be tailor-made? Like Firoz said, that, there is one solution for the Indian context. Do people need to also customize their own solutions to it?
Absolutely agree with Feroz on that, that we need to customize and tailor make these solutions. There are multiple methods actually, Sumaira, to compute this withdrawable kitty. There is an actual expense method and there is a replacement ratio methods. These have been provided in various textbooks of finance. So what it says is typically 68 to 90% of your income, which you are earning pre-retirement, if you can provision for that kind of an income base to come to you every month post retirement also, that should be a good enough number. And then there is this method called actual expenses method, which actually makes you write down all your expenses, monthly expenses, and then figure out that post retirement, how will your lifestyle change? Which are those expenses, let's say EMIs, housing loans, or other children education expenses, and so on and so forth, which will go away, and which are new expenses which will come into your kitty, like your medical expenses or your traveling expenses, and so on and so forth. And then make an actual listing of those expenses, adjust it for inflation, and then plan very scientifically according to that. But as you rightly said, there are many variables around it. There are few variables which you can change and few variables which you cannot change, right? So some things which you can't change, and the first and foremost thing is your longevity, right? You don't know how long are you going to live. You provision for 25 to 30 years, you might perhaps end up living because of medical research and advanced technologies and everything. The mortality rates have been going up, right? Ages have been going up. So it could be 30 years, 40 years also. So you have to provision adequately, number one. Inflation is the biggest variable around the world, which even central banks can't chase and compete with. And so it's very difficult to call out what rate of inflation to assume. You can go the advanced economy way of going to 3% inflation in next 20 years. You can even go the other way around and have very high inflation in the country. So that's a very big variable. Market returns, how much will your portfolio give you? How much will your portfolio generate? It will depend obviously on your combination of equity and debt. But other than that, also how the markets will behave is beyond anyone's control. So these are variables which can't be controlled, and variables which can be controlled. And the biggest one is your retirement age. One thing which everyone needs to adjust, and in private jobs, perhaps it's possible to defer your retirement age if you think your corpus is not sufficient, right? People today are actually wanting to retire early. Everyone, including you and I, want to retire at an early age, travel and do multiple things, but you have to be sufficiently covered. You have to be mentally satisfied that the corpus is good enough for you to take, to call it quits, right? And the last thing which you can change is your investment mix. If things are not going right, you have to reassess every year, change your investment mix, change the equity debt allocation, keep it conservative because you are retired, because there's no fresh source of income, but you have to keep revisiting and keep changing that investment mix. So.
All right, fair enough, So, but the thing is, we can keep talking about how much you should withdraw, but maybe spend a little time on where you're withdrawing from, right? Firoz, what is the biggest fear is that people haven't accumulated enough in their retirement kitty, which is why they may run out of savings, or is it that they are utilizing too much of it in the early years post-retirement?
So, both of it. To my mind, I think the first question which each of us need to answer is, are you retirement ready? That's one decision point. If I am retirement ready or not, and when will I be, helps you plan at the age of 40, 50. If you don't have 10 times your annual expense at the time of retirement as your retirement corpus, you are surely not retirement ready. So you will have to work, maybe part-time, consult, do whatever. If you don't have 10 times, then you can't retire. So if somebody has got a 50 lakh rupee expense, exorbitant expense per annum, he needs to retire with at least 55 crores of minimum corpus. That's point one. Point two is that helps me decipher how much expense can I have in this particular year. That's why that first point is important. Second point, I'd like to mention that rule, Sumaira. Because the second decision is how much and where should it be. Then comes where do I withdraw it from. So the second part of the decision is, should I have 100% debt? Should I have equity and debt, and what proportions? If you have only 10 times the corpus, which is the bare minimum to retire, you will have to have at least 60% in equity. If you have 15 times that corpus, then you can have 35% in equity. If you have 20 times the corpus, you can do away with equity and have zero equity and still survive very beautifully in an Indian inflationary and interest rate context. If you have more than 20 times of your annual expense, that's when you think of transmitting it to your kin in the form of spouse or children. So that's, I think, the rule. 10 times, have 60% equity, 15 times, have 35% equity. If you already have 20 times, have zero equity. If you have more than 20 times, is when you think of somebody else beyond your life.
No, absolutely. And, very well put, because at least in India, one of the big aspirations that a lot of people have is to want to pass on wealth to the next generation, right? But, if you don't have enough for yourself, one is that, you don't have enough for yourself. And second is you won't be able to pass it on. So this is a very real concern that people need to take up very, very seriously. Anyway, we're going to take a very quick break, but we'll continue this chat on the other side. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back. You're watching Money, 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 and with us are our two experts, Feroz Aziz, Deputy CEO of Anand Rathi Wealth, and Mohit Gang, CEO and co-founder of Money Front. And we're talking about how much can you withdraw post-retirement to ensure that you don't run out of savings. Feroz, we've spoken so much about what are the various ways in which you can compute this. But should it be a one rate throughout retirement, or should this withdrawal rate also keep changing? I mean, is it possible to have a dynamic withdrawal rate? What would you recommend?
I would definitely recommend a dynamic withdrawal rate. Okay, and now comes the question of how dynamic should that dynamic be? Should it be a yearly reset, or every 3 years you look at the context and repeg it? I would say dynamic, absolutely yes, Sumaira, because there is inflation. There are changing needs. There could be different expenses at different stages. Your medical needs could be different. So point is, it has to be dynamic. It can't be static over 30 years. That's very utopian. Second, its dynamism should not be too high frequency. It should be once in every 3 years. You revisit the situation and recalibrate, because in 3 years, your corpus would not have grown exactly equal to what you envisaged when you began. You might have assumed the interest or earning growth of 8-9%. If equity markets did well, and if you had some money, as we spoke in the last segment, in equity, you would have grown 11-12%. So it gives you that flexibility to be a little more generous, not frugal, in the next 3 year leg. So I think it should be dynamic, and with a frequency of 3 years. Reason of it being 3 years is because it is not just about you. It's about also where you've invested your money. That will require an adequate period to throw up a different output for the subsequent 3 years.
Absolutely. And I mean, things are already so dynamic now. But, Mohit, the baby boomers who were a little more prudent probably than us, they are now passing over the baton to, Gen X, to the millennials. Therefore, for people who are starting to plan their, retirement investments now, do you think their habits are going to change by the time, people like us, Gen X, millennials, we actually retire? I mean, what are the changes of the future, and how should we therefore be prepared for it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I meet people at 25 and 30 years age who are talking about retirement these days. So I think the world has changed upside down. And people really want to retire as soon as possible. They have different hobbies. They want to travel across the globe and want to do multiple things, right? So the longer your time frame of retirement has to be, which I think is increasing in everyone's case, the more the provisioning, right? So the more you'll have to stock up, the more you'll have to provision, the more you'll have to plan, and the more variables to tackle for. So I think the planning exercise, the retirement exercise becomes even more complex. I think previous generations or our fathers and our grandfathers had a good enough corpus in physical assets. These days, the migration to financial assets have been increasing rapidly. And I think in the next 5-10 years, this financialization of savings is going to be much more rapid. So I think in that context, the corpus will be fairly liquid for all of us. vis-a-vis the corpus for our parents and grandparents, which was mostly held in real estate or held in gold. So I think that's also one generational shift which is happening, and the provisioning will have to be taken care of accordingly. So that's one another factor. I think healthcare expenses, that's been ballooning through the roof. I think in terms of the planning part of it, taking proper insurances and all those things will have to be properly planned for. Again, previous generations didn't plan so much for those, and there weren't so many diseases that point in time. Look, so many variables and unknown diseases have been cropping up every now and then. So these all things have made it a little more complex in terms of planning and exercising the entire thing. The investment tools and the investment kits, the products per se have also multiplied massively. The kind of choices which you have available, the kind of planning exercises which can be done now is much more advanced and sophisticated, right? And as Firoz I think mentioned also, that you can't just take a steady state rate. You will have to keep tweaking the rate every year, seeing what is working well and what is not working well. So first year you start at a very low withdrawal rate, then you gradually increase it. If you think the corpus is going on well, if the investment mix is giving you good returns, then you increase the withdrawal rate a little, right? But if you, the moment you think the investment mix is not working well for you, you kind of reduce your withdrawal rate. So the withdrawal rate has to be very, very dynamically managed, depending on the kind of scenario you're living in and depending on the
Absolutely.
investment portfolio.
Okay. And just because we're talking about retirement, there's one more thing that I want to put on the table. Firoz, you have recommended this separation of consumption wealth, which, the retiree would need, and generation wealth, which is what they want to pass on to their heirs. Would this help greatly in tiding over any unexpected shortfalls?
Yes, Sumera. I think, see, anybody who has more than 20 times their current annual salary is qualified to bifurcate this into two. Because you will at least need to have 20 times your annual expense, because there are three possible surprises. One is inflation, right? Who in the US would have thought, planning 5 years back, that the inflation could be at a 30-year high, right? So if inflation could be a party spoiler. Your own some one-off ad hoc expenses could be a party spoiler. The assets which you invested in might not perform in short terms as per your expectation. So that's why having 20 times your annual salary is one kitty, which is the consumption bucket. Then comes the transmission bucket, which you are clear that this will go to the next generation. The strategy of the transmission bucket is going to be very different because there's no withdrawal envisaged from that component. So if it is going to be an untouched portion, the equity proportions could be different, the strategy could be different, the product choices could be different. Ironically, when you look at the first bucket, Indians have, in the first bucket or the retirement corpus itself, most products which are currently popular are all debt focused. Be the PPFs, the EPFs, the insurance policies, the term plan or the endowment plans which are being used as retirement vehicles don't have equity. Only ELSS, probably with the tax benefit it has, and now the NPS has some equity exposure. So point I'm trying to make is, it's very important to bifurcate these two, provided you qualify to bifurcate. And if you're bifurcated, the second point I'm making is the strategy will be dramatically different. You can't extrapolate the strategy of one bucket to another. This is long-term generational wealth. The objective of this transmitting money has to be as per the child or as per your spouse's risk appetite, not yours.
Absolutely. Firoz, Mohit, thank you very, very much for putting all of these points on the table. And I hope everybody who's watching, whichever way you decide to do it, I hope that you'll take action soon enough. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned to CNBC TV 18.